could not simply look away in the name of solidarity with a liberation movement leader. The lesson I drew from Zimbabwe, and it is a lesson directly relevant to the coup epidemic we now face across the Sahel, is that African solidarity cannot be unconditional. When a leader uses the language of anti-colonialism and sovereignty as a shield for the systematic destruction of his own people's livelihoods and rights, African institutions have responsibility to say so and to do something about it. And indeed, African Union Constitutive Act has a place in that. In Sudan, I served on the African Union High-Level Panel on Darfur, which I chaired. The conflict in Darfur, which began in 2003, has claimed estimates ranging from 200,000 to 500,000 lives, with the United Nations describing the situation at its peak as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The complexity of Sudan was compounded by the simultaneous North-South dimension, which was being addressed through the comprehensive peace agreement process that led to the independence of South Sudan in 2011. In Darfur, we worked to produce a framework for political settlement while also engaging the International Criminal Court process against President Omar al-Bashir. I have also been engaged in efforts to resolve conflict in Ethiopia, Guinea-Bissau, Madagascar, Togo, and other countries across the continent. In each case, the pattern is recognizable. Elite competition for power and resources, the weaponization of ethnic or religious identity, the failure of institutions to manage legitimate grievances through peaceful means, the exploitation of weaknesses by external actors, and the devastation caused paid by ordinary men, women, and children who wanted nothing more than security and a decent life. And in each case, the possibility of resolution was present from the beginning. Conflicts are not natural disasters. They are human choices, and they can be ended by human choices through dialogue. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, what do I conclude from all of these? Several things that are directly relevant to the work of this conference. The first conclusion is that intelligence is indispensable to conflict prevention and very necessary for conflict resolution, and woefully underused for the purpose. In nearly every conflict I have helped to mediate, the warning signs were visible months or even years before first shot was fired. Ethnic tensions were being deliberately inflamed. Electoral processes were being manipulated. Youth were being recruited into militias. Economic marginalization was deepening. Regional neighbors were beginning to take sides. The information existed. What was missing was the institutional will to act on it, to share it across borders, and to take the political risks that early intervention requires. The intelligence community in Africa must become more explicit and systematically focused on early warning and early action by regional leaders. The continental early warning system of the African Union exists for precisely this purpose. It must be better resourced, better staffed, and above all, better connected to the decision makers who are prepared to act on what it tells them. The second conclusion is that mediation without accurate intelligence is half blind. In Burundi, in the DRC, in Sierra Leone, and in Sudan, there were moments when the mediators, myself included, lacked accurate information about what was happening on the ground, about the true motivations of the parties, about the external actors who were financing or arming particular groups, and about the capacity of armed movements to implement any agreement they signed. Better intelligence sharing between the security services of neighboring countries and mediating bodies will have improved our analysis and our proposal in every one of those cases. Intelligence and diplomacy are not separate domains. They are partners in the service of peace. The third conclusion is that the financing and arming of proxy forces by external actors is one of the greatest obstacles to durable peace in Africa, and that intelligence services have a particular responsibility to expose it. In the DRC, Rwandan and Ugandan support for armed groups was documented over the years by UN panel of experts reports. In Sudan, external actors provided material and political support to parties that had no incentive to reach a settlement as long as that support continued. In Libya, since the fall of Gaddafi in 2011, a bewildering array of external states, including the UAE, Turkey, Egypt, Russia, and several European governments, have poured weapons and fighters into a conflict that they have simultaneously claimed to want to resolve. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. African intelligence services that can accurately map these external interventions and bring that mapping to the attention of the African Union and the UN Security Council perform a service not only to countries directly concerned, but to the entire project of African peace. This conviction, refined over decades, led me to develop what I call the Obasanjo 55+20 leadership framework, identifying 55 attributes and 20 values that in combination constitute the foundation of transformational leadership. I offer it as not as the academic exercise, but as a practical instrument for those who carry responsibility for the security and well-being of our peoples. They are the observable, measurable characteristics that distinguish leaders who build enduring institutions from those who hollow out whatever they inherit. In my experience of conflict resolution across the continent, the attribute I have found most consistently decisive is what the framework calls courageous honesty. The willingness to tell the parties to a conflict, and indeed to tell one's own government what they need to hear, rather than what they wish to hear or what they want to hear. Mediators who tell comfortable falsehoods to keep parties at table produce agreements that collapse. Leaders who tell their security services that intelligence assessment are welcome only when they confirm the preferred narrative produce intelligence services that stop telling the truth. And yet, intelligence services must tell it as it is. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn to the theme of this conference and speak directly to the geopolitical environment in which African security agencies must operate. That environment has changed fundamentally since the turn of this century, and the pace of that change has accelerated sharply in the past 5 years. We are witnessing first the fracturing of the post-1945 multilateral order. The United Nations Security Council is increasingly paralyzed by great power rivalry. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 and the international community's deeply inconsistent response to conflicts from Gaza to the Sahel have demonstrated that the rule-based international order is applied selectively, and that Africa, when it receives any consideration at all, is too often viewed through the lens of great power competition rather than African agency. I saw this pattern clearly in the Congo in the 1960s. I saw it in Angola, where the United States and the Soviet Union fueled a civil war for decades. I see it again today in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, and in Libya. The external powers have changed their names and sometimes their methods, but the underlying pattern has not changed. We are witnessing, second, A new scramble for Africa. China's Belt and Road Initiative has deepened infrastructure links across Africa, while also deepening debt dependency in a number of our member states. According to the China-Africa Research Initiative in Johns Hopkins University, 49 of Africa's 54 countries have signed Belt and Road Agreement, and China is the continent's largest bilateral creditor, holding an estimated 23% of Africa's external debt as at 2023. Russia has aggressively expanded its presence through the Wagner Group and its successors, deploying proxy forces as instruments of influence in Mali, the Central African Republic, Libya, Sudan, and beyond. France has been expelled from a series of its former satellites, leaving behind security vacuums that others have rushed to fill. I warned during my own presidency and in the years since that Africa must be vigilant about any external partner that offers security assistance without demanding governance improvement in return. Such partners are not building Africa's future. They are extracting Africa's present. We are witnessing, third, a terrorism and violent extremism crisis of continental proportions. The Global Terrorism Index 2024 identified that Sahel as according to more terrorism-related deaths than any other region on earth. Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam, Fal Muslimin, and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara have made vast territory across the three border areas of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger effectively ungovernable. We are witnessing, fourth, some form of coup epidemic. Since 2020, successful coups have taken place in Mali twice, Guinea, Sudan, Burkina Faso twice, Niger, and Gabon. I do not underestimate the legitimate grievances that have animated popular support for some of these transitions. I have spent decades engaging with the failure of civilian governance that have made military takeovers seem to some populations like a relief. But I repeat, what history has taught me without ambiguity. Military governments have never delivered sustained development or genuine security in Africa. We are witnessing fifth technology revolution that is simultaneously a security opportunity and a security threat of the first order. Artificial intelligence, drone warfare, cyber operations, and large-scale disinformation campaigns have fundamentally altered the security environment. The Malabo Convention on Cybersecurity finally entered into force in 2023, but has been ratified by fewer than 20 of the 55 AU member states as of 2025. This is a framework gathering dust while our adversaries operate at machine speed. We must do better. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, given this landscape and drawing on everything I have observed across almost 6 decades of conflict and conflict resolution, let me offer 5 propositions about the security architecture Africa genuinely needs. First, Africa needs a security architecture grounded in the primacy of the human being. I have sat in rooms where the fate of millions of people was being decided by a handful of men who had never visited the villages whose people lived in. The abstraction of human suffering into a negotiating variable is one of the most dangerous pathologies of modern statecraft. Second, Africa needs a security architecture built on genuine continental solidarity and interoperability. The African peace and security architecture, established through the Constitutive Act of the African Union in 2000, was a bold institutional step to which I was personally committed. The African Standby Force, the Continental Early Warning System, the Panel of the Wise, and the Peace Fund together constitute a framework of real promise, but the African Standby Force has not yet been deployed in a significant crisis. Third, Africa needs a security architecture that confronts the financing of insecurity. In every conflict I have mediated, money has been central. In Liberia, the illegal timber and diamond trade financed Charles Taylor's network. In Sierra Leone, the RUF financed itself through Blood Diamond and the proceeds of forced mining in the DRC, coltan, gold, and cobalt finance armed groups to this day. In the Sahel, illicit gold and narcotics are the primary financial engine of jihadist organization. According to the Intergovernmental Action Group Against Money Laundering, in West Africa, illicit financial flows out of West Africa alone exceed $50 billion annually. Fourth, Africa needs a security architecture that is technologically sovereign. This does not mean rejecting international technology partnership. It means insisting that Africa develops its own capability, trains its own technical cadre, and ensures that critical security infrastructure is not wholly dependent on systems controlled by foreign governments or compromised by ourselves. In the conflicts I have mediated, the dependence of African parties on external communication system and the analytical tools created vulnerabilities that were sometimes exploited. A continent that cannot monitor its own digital space cannot adequately protect its own physical space. Fifth, and most fundamentally, Africa needs a security architecture underpinned by accountable governance. The connection between governance quality and security outcomes is not theoretical. It is the lesson of every peace process I have participated in. States with accountable intelligence and institutions, function rule of law, and free media manage security challenges far more effectively than those without. When citizens believe that the state serves them, they cooperate with security agencies and resist the narratives of violence extremist organizations. When citizens believe that the state is the enemy because the state has, in fact, treated them as enemies, security agencies lose most important assets they possess: public legitimacy. No surveillance technology and no counter-insurgency doctrine can fully compensate for the loss of of such assets. To the heads of intelligence and security agencies in this hall, I want to address a specific professional challenge. Your agencies occupy an unusual and sometimes deeply uncomfortable position in the structure of democratic governance. You must protect the state, but you must do so in ways that do not corrode the values that make the state worth protecting. You must collect and analyze intelligence about threats, but you must do so within legal frameworks that respect the rights of citizens. You must cooperate with international partners, but you must ensure that such cooperation does not compromise the sovereignty of your nations or make your countries instruments of foreign agendas. I want to say plainly, intelligence services that operate with integrity, that are genuinely subordinate to civilian authority, that are subject to effective parliamentary and judicial oversight, and that demonstrate accountability are not weaker services. They are, in fact, stronger ones. The intelligence community of a state whose citizens and government trust it can leverage the full information resources of its society. The intelligence community of a state that has forfeited public trust opens its isolation dependent on coercion rather than cooperation. I have seen both types of intelligence services in operation during my decades in public life. And there is no contest between them in terms of their operational effectiveness. The sharing of intelligence across African borders, which is a central purpose of gathering such as phase one, depends ultimately on mutual trust between services. That trust is built not only through technical protocols and liaison arrangements, but through demonstrated professional standards and institutional integrity. I urge you to invest in that trust deliberately and consistently, to share out only information, but not only information, but analytical frameworks to challenge one another's assessment with professional respect, and to create through this conference and through the bilateral and multilateral arrangements that follow from this conference, something that has never fully existed in Africa. A continental intelligence community worthy of the name. You may start at the regional level effectively and quickly move to continental level. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are living through the most significant restructuring of the international order since the end of the Second World War. The unipolar movement is definitely over. We are moving towards a multipolar world in which the United States, China, Russia, the European Union, and India will compete for influence. There will be regional powers as well, such as Brazil, Turkey, Indonesia, and so on. Africa has 55 votes in the United Nations General Assembly. Africa has more than 1.4 billion people and is projected to be home to 2.5 billion people by 2050, according to the United Nations Department of Economics and Social Affairs. Africa's median age is approximately 19 years, the youngest of any continent, of any continental region on Earth. A demographic reality that is simultaneously a profound opportunity and a profound security challenge. Africa sits atop the mineral resources that the global green energy transition requires. The Democratic Republic of Congo alone holds an estimated 70% of the world's cobalt reserves. In any rational calculus, Africa should be a power of the first rank in the emerging multi-power order or multipolar order. But we are not, and we will not. We are not, and we will not achieve that position by allowing ourselves to become a theater for great power competition as we were during the Cold War and as we are increasingly at risk of becoming again. I have spent too much of my adult life trying to repair the damage that external interference in Africa, in African conflicts, have caused to have any patience left for argument that such interference is, in any meaningful sense, benign. The Mashariki Cooperation Conference and the Continental Security Cooperation it represents is one of the instruments through which Africa can begin to assert a genuine security sovereignty. I urge you to treat it as such, beginning at regional to continental level. I am going to 90 years of age. I have seen Africa at its most hopeful and at its most despairing. I have sat across negotiating tables from warlords who had ordered the massacre of civilians and from statesmen of genuine nobility. I have experienced the particular exhaustion of a peaceful process that collapsed after years of effort, and the particular satisfaction rare but real of seeing of communities that were tearing each other apart. Slowly and fundamentally to rebuild. I am still learning from all of this. What I know with a certainty that age and different experiences have only deepened is this: Africa's conflicts are not inevitable. They are not the product of some inherent African incapacity for peace. They are the product of specific, identifiable failures of leadership, governance, management, and institution building, and of the persistent willingness of external actors to exploit those failures and those actors are not beyond the capacity of the intelligence community. Addressing them is not beyond the capacity of African political leadership. What is required is the will to do it and the courage and audacity to get it done. The 55 attributes and 20 values of the 55 plus 20 leadership framework has a lot in it for achieving that. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. My brothers and sisters of the intelligence and security service, serve your nations, protect your people, share your knowledge across borders, expose the financiers and the arms suppliers and the external manipulators who profit from African inability and instability. Build the continental intelligence community that Africa needs and lead at every level and in every decision with the integrity and the courage that this continent and its people deserve from those that they have entrusted with such extraordinary power as you have been entrusted. Let me sound a strong warning again. The failure of intelligence can be a disaster for the giver and the receiver and beyond. And a question follows: how and where we can all draw lessons? How and where we can all draw lessons? And let me put it clearly. Is Iran a true, genuine, and serious threat to the U.S.? I leave that to you. Misinterpretation and misapplication of intelligence is always disastrous. We saw that in Iraq. I thank the government and people of Kenya for this extraordinary hospitality. I thank Director General Nordin Haji and the National Intelligence Service for this singular honor. I wish the deliberations of this conference the wisdom, the frankness, and the continental purpose that this moment demands. God bless Kenya. God bless Africa. God bless global Africa.
Wow. Comprehensive, candid. I told you he was a teacher, definitely a teacher as well. A few things, and I'll be very brief because of time, that just are important for us not to lose. When the people believe the state cares, they cooperate. Let us not corrode the values that make the state worth protecting as you do your day-to-day jobs, keeping that in mind. We must not become a theater of great power competition, and we face this risk. Our problems are not inevitable. We must deal with the challenges, the failures that we face. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. I wonder if it would be okay for a suggestion that the framework, 50+20 leadership framework, be considered at the National Intelligence Research University College. How can we take some of these learnings and pass them on to students, to people who will serve our public sector and serve the intelligence community and beyond? Ladies and gentlemen, now it is my pleasure to welcome our guest of honor, the Honorable Dr. Musalia Mudavadi, who is the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the Cabinet Secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs of the Republic of Kenya. Let's give him a warm welcome, please, as he comes up.
Thank you, Judy. Your Excellency, General Obasanjo, former President of Nigeria, the Honorable Kipchumba Murkomen, Mr. Nuri, the Director General of the National Intelligence Service of the Republic of Kenya, heads of intelligence and security services, leaders of regional and continental institutions, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I extend my sincere appreciation to each one of you and to the esteemed institutions you represent for your presence here today and your continued commitment to advancing our shared security objectives. This conference is of critical significance as its deliberations and outcomes will contribute to shaping a new paradigm for Africa and beyond in seeking solutions to persistent and emerging continental and global security challenges. Evidently, security remains among the foremost concerns for Africa, as it is globally. Indeed, no nation can attain its development ambitions without a firm foundation of peace and security. And I think President Obasanjo has really elaborated on this. The nexus between security, peace, and development is now clearly established. We must, therefore, steadily build a geopolitical trajectory around one of Africa's most important pillars of progress, peace and security as the foundation of sustainable development. The economic value of peace and security outweighs many of the prevailing material economic objectives pursued by states. Ladies and gentlemen, please underline that I'm talking of the economic value of peace and security. I'm not talking about the economic value of an airport. I'm not talking about the economic value of a road. I'm not talking about the economic value of electrification. I'm talking about the economic value of peace and security. Overall, there's a growing need to advance African agency, particularly in the security domain. The Mashariki Cooperation Conference is emerging as a catalyst for a proactive Africa, committed to security, stability, and development of its rich natural resources and human capital to enhance shared continental prosperity and strengthen Africa's global influence. Therefore, this year's theme, Emerging Geopolitical Dynamics and Africa's Security Architecture, is not only timely, but also important in making us reflect on the forces shaping Africa's evolving security environment. Again, Obasanjo has really emphasized this particular issue. So I'll try to truncate my remarks so that I don't really have to keep here for much longer on this particular issue. Historically, the global intelligence system has evolved through four notable phases. The first is the pre-World War I period, where intelligence was central to statecraft, operating within an era of secret diplomacy, where nations frequently relied on war as an instrument of foreign policy. The second phase unfolded in the aftermath of the war, in which intelligence increasingly served as a facilitator of diplomatic engagement rather than solely an enabler of military strategy. During this period, leaders such as Woodrow Wilson championed reforms to the global peace and security architecture, notably through his 14-point program, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, for world peace to prevent future conflicts. Some of the key and most important and consequential principles out of these 14 points include: 1, open diplomacy, meant to abolish secret treaties that were considered the cause of war. 2, freedom of the seas, to advance absolute freedom of navigation in both peace and war times. I don't know whether we are beginning to see a lot of movement around this space. Removal of economic barriers, reduction of armaments, respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty. That was one of the number 5 principle. 6th was the formation of a general association of nations. This was in fact his 14th point, which led to the creation of the League of Nations and later inspired the formation of the United Nations, an organization that has been at the center of global peace and security. The other points relate to the geopolitical and geosecurity dynamics of Europe at the time. Incidentally, very little focus was given to Africa. The third phase, marked by the Cold War period, represented a major stage in the evolution of global intelligence systems, in addition to focusing on counterintelligence to gain strategic advantages, manage geopolitical confrontations, and enhance security intelligence, played a prominent role in shaping public opinion and countering rival ideology. The rise of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and the now defunct Warsaw Pact shaped both the global and African security architecture. We should not lose sight of the fact that NATO itself is now going through a recalibration. Today, we find ourselves in the 4th phase of this evolution, where robust intelligence is required to navigate a rapidly changing and complex international system, that simultaneously employs open and covert diplomatic approaches, including transactional engagements amid increased military competition. We are witnessing weaponization of tariffs alongside increasing and broadening of sanction regimes in this arena of geoeconomics. What, for instance, would be the direct role of intelligence in enhancing our economic and commercial diplomacy? Or is it leverage? Accordingly, the deliberations of this conference must be forward-looking. We must confront hard truths about the current global landscape and its implications for Africa's security architecture. Multilateralism is under strain as unilateralism resurges and intensifies. The fundamental principles of diplomacy are being eroded, with militarism re-emerging as a common instrument of foreign policy. In such a world, clarity of national interests is often blurred, highlighting the need for advanced intelligence-led geoeconomics and geopolitical decision-making. We must begin to strategically prepare for the world beyond the current global order. It is now apparent no single nation can fully address these challenges in isolation. Therefore, as leaders and practitioners, we are called upon to respond to challenges of our times by strengthening coordination across borders, institutions, and partnerships. Teamwork is the hallmark of success. Working together in the spirit of whole of government and whole of society, alongside collaboration across borders, will make our continent stable and strong to confront the emerging security challenges. This, in my view, is the foundation of successful intelligence work. This is what will underpin the integrity and confidence in which citizens vest in your service. We must anticipate risks, strengthen cooperation, and support the development of resilient institutions. In this regard, collaboration among African states remains an important component in addressing shared challenges. The Mashariki Cooperation Conference must go beyond dialogue by encouraging and actualizing intelligence cooperation and policy coordination. Africa continues to navigate an evolving strategic environment that presents both challenges and opportunities. Therefore, it is expected that the reflections and exchanges in this forum will contribute meaningfully to addressing the security challenges while maximizing the opportunities to strengthen security across our continent. Looking at the sub-themes of this conference, I note that you have aptly captured the current geopolitical environment, as well as the gaps and entry points for strengthening Africa's security architecture. Indeed, it is an opportune moment to rethink and recalibrate the African security architecture so as to adapt to increasingly complex and multidimensional security challenges. Africa is witnessing a convergence of complex and evolving challenges, including high-intensity conflicts, emerging technological perils such as the misuse of artificial intelligence and digital innovations, resurgence of unconstitutional changes of government, environmental degradation, the mutating face of terrorism, as aptly captured by previous speakers, demographic shifts and migration, and the disruptive geopolitical rivalry over the continent's immense natural resources. Ladies and gentlemen, let me try to provoke you. In addition, I wish to draw the attention of this gathering to two emerging trends for deeper reflection. First is the notion of privatization of peace. Let me repeat that. The notion of privatization of peace. With multilateralism in crisis, transactional approaches to peace and security are emerging, manifesting in incentivized peace. The pursuit of private gain in peace initiatives, and the growing treatment of peace as an economic asset. I think this sounds very familiar. In fact, in some quarters now, it is opined that foreign policy increasingly treats diplomacy as a transaction and sovereignty as a negotiable property. We are witnessing rearmament instead of post-conflict reconstruction that delivers peace dividends intended for economic development of the citizens. Broadly, some diplomacy scholars and commentators contend that traditional diplomacy is gradually being supplanted by deal-making, effectively turning peace into a private enterprise. The second item I wish to put on the table, again to provoke you, is the privatization of security. And I repeat, privatization of security. There is a growing trend towards outsourcing of security interventions, as demonstrated by the proliferation of private military and security companies, as well as mercenaries on the continent. It seems the state may be ceding its monopoly on matters of security. In this regard, the question that arises is, how should intelligence experts, that is yourselves, respond to these developments and the emerging context? Ultimately, Africa's comprehensive security must be collective, proactive, and preventive, and deeply intertwined with justice and human dignity. When you privatize security, who becomes responsible for justice, who becomes responsible for human dignity, who becomes accountable for human rights standards. Before I leave the podium, let me make just a few observations. First one is on a lighter note. I am standing on this podium with absolute confidence due to the high concentration of high-level security in the room. If any threats were to arise, I am confident they would be neutralized long before we even became aware of them. So I am safe. That's why I can speak to you like this. Second, I reaffirm with appreciation that Kenya is honored to host this high-level conference. Our nation continues to serve as a bridge between regions and partners and a consistent advocate for cooperative security. Finally, I also wish to commend the Director General of the National Intelligence Service, Mr. Nuruddin Haji, and his entire team for the successful preparation of this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the ball is in your court. It is now my honor to declare the Mashariki Cooperation Conference 2026 officially opened and wish you productive and successful engagements in the days ahead. Thank you very much. Asanteni sana and karibuni Kenya tena.
Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, some remarkable insights there and very bold, clear thoughts you have shared with us. In simple terms, I'm a communicator. If I was to simplify what you have told us, the notion of the privatization of peace, transactional approaches to peace and security are emerging. Diplomacy is now a transaction. Sovereignty is not respected. It's about the deal. In simple terms, as a communicator, you call that a protection racket. So global. Is that where we are headed? And can Africa deal with those realities if we do not stand alongside each other? What is our leverage? What is our strength as individual countries? What is our leverage? What is our strength as a united Africa? And when you look deeper, the Afro-Caribbean states often stand with us when we have one voice. Who is Africa? What are we prepared to give, contribute to this new architecture for the world and to our own? Thank you so, so much for all the remarkable insights to all the speakers. Let's give them a